HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents Go Further, edited by Paul Myers and S.W. Lauden. Read by Keith Sellon-Wright and Christina Delaine. Introduction. Music is limitless, so it only makes sense that once you've gone all the way, the logical next step is to go further. In 2019, writers S.W. Lauden and Paul Myers teamed up to curate, compile, edit, and contribute to a literary anthology of music writing and prose that was either focused on or inspired by the oft-maligned rock and roll subgenre known for better or worse as power pop. Tyson Cornell at Rare Bird supported this idea from the start, and the end result, Go All the Way, was a fresh compilation of compelling and often personal stories that ranged from pure journalism to personal prose and memoir. It rocked, and a lot of literate music fans and critics seemed to agree. As Go All the Way became more widely known, other writers reached out to Paul and Steve to express their regret at not being included in the anthology, sharing their desire to be part of any possible second volume. The fantastic response to Go All the Way turned the idea of a sequel into a realistic proposition, and the team discovered that not only was there a lot more to say, new angles from which to deconstruct the broader notion of power pop, but there were still so many great writers out there with diverse experiences and the talent to express it on the printed page. Like Go All the Way, Go Further is an incredibly rich and enlightening collection that will send you seeking out the bands and records you may have missed, while affirming those that you already loved. We won't play favorites with our 2 editions, but we are thrilled at the consistent quality of our second collection, and we hope you enjoy it as much as we enjoyed putting it together. Glitter and Glue by Dave Hill. Power pop. Will we ever really understand it? Probably not. But I, Dave Hill, have at the very least been trying ever since I was a little kid growing up on the mean streets of suburban Cleveland back in the 70s and 80s, prime power pop years any way you slice it. I'll never remember the name of it, but sometime around then I watched a made-for-TV movie about a struggling power pop band, redundant, I know, trying to make it big in their town, while their rock nemesis, a glam outfit whose singer had the good sense to rip his shirt off, with the help of adoring female fans, of course, only to reveal he'd had a glittery star on his chest the whole time, something almost no major chord progression could possibly compete with in the short term, captured the hearts, minds, and mullets of everyone that happened to show up at the mall the day those 2 bands were scheduled to play on opposite sides of the second-floor escalator. And while slapping a glittery star on my chest and having young feather-haired beauties rip my clothes off, just so I could be all like, "Check me out, I have a glittery star on my chest and wasn't exactly crazy about that shirt anyway, so whatevs," held a certain appeal to me back then and, admittedly, still does now. I saw way more of myself in that struggling power pop band. The guys in the plaid shirts with the tobacco-burst guitars and coiled guitar cables who had no intention of disrobing at any point during their set, or even after they got home later that night and finished unloading some borrowed station wagon. Looking back on it now, I don't think it was that dejected power pop band's seemingly mild-mannered and innocent ways, or their feel-good approach to rock that I immediately identified with. More likely, it was their sense of longing and almost certain despair of knowing that we live in a world where the noble act of wearing your heart on your sleeve is so often and easily overshadowed by a few bucks worth of glitter and glue, no doubt bought on a whim with whatever money was left after loading up on fast food, cheap beer, and smokes. And to me, that's the thing about power pop. While it's dismissed, sometimes even by its biggest fans, as carefree, whimsical, and sugary sweet, the fact of the matter is it's both serious business and a dangerous, dangerous game where people often get hurt. From the most dedicated of power pop musicians to the most casual of power pop fans, we are all Icarus, strapping on our waxen wings, fully intent on flying too close to the sun in search of that perfect combination of words and melody that brings a tingle to the spine, a tear to the eye, or even, let's be honest, a hand to the pants. Sure, it all works out just often enough to keep us coming back for more again and again, but the fact is that power pop casualties far outweigh the triumphs, and more often than not, we come crashing to the ground, a bloodied, swollen, and not least of all feather-riddled mess, at the hands of an open G to D played one too many times, while that E minor 7 sits at home all alone, the shy and weird yet stunningly beautiful girl who never got asked to the prom because we were all too afraid to ask. Worst of all, with regard to power pop, and with the risk of veering too far into the morbid, the luckiest of the bunch seemed to get it the worst in the end. From Chris Bell to half of Badfinger to, perhaps most disturbingly of all, 2020 Eric Carmen. I don't dare try to make sense of power pop's personal misfortunes, but as far as the music itself goes, it all, like most things in life, goes back to the Beatles, who are entirely to blame for introducing perfect pop rock into the world in the first place. Making matters worse, they dressed like mere mortals, at first anyway, to fool us into thinking they weren't gods, but regular folk, just like everybody else, which in turn caused us regular folk to think we could be the Beatles too. And not only could we not be the Beatles, but we got way too greedy when we even tried. Sure, we learned the descending guitar melody from She Loves You, which was, of course, great, but then we had the temerity to think we could make the whole thing even better by adding an extra yeah. Next thing you know, we're getting rid of the whole She Loves You part and replacing it with just a bunch more yeahs, like some kid at a birthday party who wanders away from the cake on the dining room table straight into the kitchen to gorge himself on leftover frosting while no one is watching until he pukes everywhere. My point, of course, is that most of the time when it comes to power pop, things go horribly wrong, and next thing you know, we're lying in the fetal position in the back seat of a Buick with fruit punch-stained lips as our mom drives us back home in silence, her lit Pall Mall dangling just inches from our soft, soft skin, threatening to scar us for life. But every so often it goes absolutely right. A diamond reveals itself in the manure, and we get a September Girls, a Come On, Come On, a Baby Blue, or yes, even a Go All the Way. And that's what keeps us coming back for more. You probably saw this coming, but I sing and play guitar in my own power pop band, just like those guys I saw in that movie all those years ago. We're called Valley Lodge, and like the vast majority of power pop bands, past and present, most people have never heard of us. Even so, millions of people have at least heard our music because we had the good fortune of having our song Go be chosen as the theme song to HBO's Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, something for which I am eternally grateful, and at least once a week, as I pretend it's no big deal at all, extremely proud. I still remember writing the skeleton of the song. My band, in keeping with the ideals of the power pop lifestyle, had just returned from our very first, and at least as of this writing last, tour of Japan. I lay in bed one night around 4 a.m., sleepless as a result of both the buzz and brutal jet lag that comes with chasing live at Budokan Dreams, when I tried to imagine a sound that might summarize everything my bandmates and I had just experienced in between stops at JFK, from recklessly devoured airplane sushi to giggling geishas politely obliging our photo requests, from street-side vending machines selling the unspeakable to near-stoic audience members who suddenly came to life at the first downbeat and knew all the words seemingly better than I did, from our tour manager growing increasingly annoyed at me for loudly repeating phrases from a discounted English to Japanese handbook in the back of our van, To the doorman at a Japanese-only strip club, surprised to hear me tell him he was a fantastic dancer for no apparent reason at all. I thought of all these things and more when suddenly, as power pop fugue states tend to go, a drumbeat, guitar melody, and counter-melody popped into my head all at once. I grabbed my phone and mumbled the whole mess into a 4-track simulator I'd recently downloaded before eventually drifting off to sleep, satisfied with the knowledge that I might be onto something that maybe, just maybe, didn't suck. Over the next few days I fleshed things out further, including writing lyrics that prominently and repeatedly featured that thing I'd said to the doorman about his dancing skills, much to the confusion of almost everyone who's heard it since. Eventually, my bandmates and I recorded a proper studio version of the song, along with 9 other songs, and released it as a full album called Use Your Weapons. And thanks to no small bit of luck, Go was chosen as the theme song to what I consider to be easily one of the best shows on television, regardless of those 30 seconds or so of familiar music they play at the beginning of each episode. I bring up my band's song Go not as an example of what I consider to be power pop excellence, one of those rare moments when it didn't all fall apart. In fact, if you listen to some of the YouTube comments on our video for the song, it could be argued things go immediately south as soon as my vocals come in. But it's an example of why guys and gals like me will always keep trying. You hear a melody and perhaps even a lyric to go with it in your head, and you think maybe if you don't screw it up and somehow manage to find that perfect balance between frosting and cake, you might just make something that would fit nicely on your record shelf alongside your favorites like Big Star, Cheap Trick, Badfinger, and, who knows, maybe even the Beatles, if they were maybe only a quarter as good, which would still make them awesome. Heck, if you got really, really lucky, you could make something that you could slip into someone else's record collection without them really even noticing. And even when that doesn't happen, it doesn't really matter anyway, because it's in that act of trying that you suddenly realize you don't need a bunch of glue and glitter to put a star on your chest after all. It was on you this whole time. Dave Hill is a comedian, writer, actor, and musician. He is the author of 3 books, Parking the Moose, 2019 Doubleday Canada Penguin Random House, Dave Hill Doesn't Live Here Anymore, 2016 Blue Rider Press, and Tasteful Nudes, 2012 St. Martin's Press. He also plays guitar and sings in the rock bands Valley Lodge, Painted Doll, and Witch Taint. Priming the Power Pop Pump by Ira Robbins. Bob Dylan had his back pages. I have mine. In early 1978, in the pages of Trouser Press, I endeavored, with the rash hubris of know-it-all certainty, to iterate the bands that comprised the power pop genre at the time. Attempts to definitively slot music into ill-defined stylistic categories are generally doomed by time, evolution, ignorance, and perspective, but attempt I did. I was a devoted fan of power pop, or as it was interchangeably called in those days, pop rock, and thought it opportune to use the small journalistic platform I'd helped create to promote it. Growing up in the 60s, I responded strongly to music that borrowed some of the smashed, blocked fury that made The Who my favorite band, and used that rushing force to convey the AM melodies that turned me onto rock and roll in the first place. The joy of power pop for me hung suspended between musical poles, a compact confection of harmonies, velocity, ringing guitars, a solid beat, and a memorable hook, suffused with innocence and set at the fulcrum of energy and beauty, free of heavy rhythms, 12-bar patterns, arrogance, bloat, unbridled aggression, machismo, and maturity. The strength of strings and the tenderness of first love. Most of power pop's first flowering 60s archetypes, like Badfinger, with the spunk of garage rock and the sweet appeal of the Beatles, had wilted by the time arena rock was being challenged by paint-stripping punk. True, a vein of tuneful rock had run through the mid-'70s New York underground, and some of the early groups on the CBGB Max's circuit in the direct wake of the Dolls, the Fast, Marbles, Miamis, Planets, Milk and Cookies, played in and around power pop. But other than the Ramones, their ilk did not attract widespread notice and had little influence. In the rest of the world, outliers like The Nerves, Jam, Flamin' Groovies, Shoes, Motors, and others were also putting a pedal to the melody, so it didn't take much more than an educated guess to postulate, as I did in the article I wrote, that New Wave, at least in the UK, and DIY, at least in the US, were about to inject power pop back into circulation. As it happened, when American labels rushed to get their piece of the end-of-the-decade youth quake, they gravitated toward the skinny tie side of punk/new wave enthusiasm. Bands with what sounded like commercial potential, music that wasn't mean, adversarial, political, or intimidating. In other words, colorful rocking groups with appealing tunes. But before those clarifying events had occurred, the exponents I thought fit the bill at the beginning of 1978 were a decidedly mixed lot, not all of whom would qualify, borrowing Nick Lowe's nervously revised American album title of that year, as pure pop for now people. Here's the introduction that ran, in an awful script typeface, on page 22 of the April 1978 issue of Trouser Press, over the headline, A Power Pop Primer. If one may hazard an absurd guess, based on no real information, it will probably be around November of this year when some smart punk rocker will wake up and realize that a change has occurred since the inception of the new wave. In place of similar-sounding four-piece noise machines, groups that used to be called punk are replacing hoarse shouts with melody, and volume with a sense of dynamics. Not that groups have abandoned their instruments or ideals, just that a new influence has been taken on. At that point, the renaissance of power pop will have officially occurred. Not that power pop is anything new. A few groups have always managed to hold on, even during the roughest trend, to the notion that ideal music blends songs, lyrics, and energy into a form where catchy hooks find the strength of blaring guitars a help, not a distraction. That's power pop rock with hooks. Not tepid chart stuff like Gary Wright that uses studio musicians to lend rock credibility. Not Led Zepp riff rock. Not overblown, gas-filled balloons like ELP. Not wimpy ballads like Debbie Boone. Just hard rock with a beat and a melody, something you can sing on the subway or rehearse with your band. Music that'll stay with you a while, but not too long. Already, in fact, since the beginning, there have been new wave bands devoted to power pop. Although a large segment of the bands is more blam-blam oriented, the general trend so far has been toward power pop, not away. Groups that were unheard names in the British press a year ago are turning out to be, with fair regularity, more or less pop groups that joined in the fun and got swept along by the excitement before they had a chance to explain what they were about. Generation X, advertising, yachts, gorillas, and motors are all incipient pop bands. Larger names like The Clash and Vibrators are forging strong pop-punk connections, and in America, the Ramones are becoming young Beach Boys in leather jackets. Okay, so far so good. Clearly I wasn't making a bold prediction, just acknowledging a developing trend. So who got corralled into this club? According to me, these were the power pop acts active, which is why Big Star, Nas, and the Sidewinders are AWOL, no such excuse for the absence of the Beach Boys or the Paley Brothers, at the start of 1978. ABBA, BTO, Bay City Rollers, Blondie, Boston, Eric Carmen, Cheap Trick, City Boy, Clash, Dictators, Eddie and the Hot Rods, Flamin' Groovies, Jam, Kiss, Kurzel Flyers, Nick Lowe, Tom Petty, Pez Band, Piper, Quick, Radio Stars, Ramones, Rubinus, Todd Rundgren, Shoes, Slade, Sparks, Chris Stamey, Michael Stanley Band, Sweet, Dwight Tilley Band, Vibrators, Wings. Yeah, I know. A bit of an eye-roller, that. The assessing, predicting end of rock journalism resembles political punditry in one sense. It is always disheartening to see how often one has been proven wrong. But if you didn't know anything about the subsequent 40-plus years of music, maybe this blurry snapshot of 1978 doesn't seem so off base. Today I would keep about half of them on the list. A few had stylistic attributes that swayed me, but were either dabblers — Petty and the Hot Rods were included on the basis of a single song each — or evolvers who soon left the froth of power pop behind. Some of these acts, BTO, Slade, ABBA, Kiss, fit nobody's definition of the genre. As I declared during the interview I did a few years back for the Power Pop movie, I would belatedly disqualify the Raspberries and the Knack, notwithstanding their fealty to the form's canonical audio attributes, for crimes of overt concupiscence and a dearth of winsomeness. I know that's a heretical view. The 6-page article consisted of a few flippant sentences about each of the acts, preceded by nerdy ratings for pop consciousness, listenability, disco taint, and absurd irrelevance, but a sign of the times, I suppose, and songwriting. I can't say a lot of wisdom is imparted in the piece. My abiding conviction seems to have been that a non-wimpy, non-commercial, non-pandering version of poppiness was nirvana. Everything else undermined it. As a purity test, that may have missed the point, making it seem as if power pop could only thrive in a stylistic isolation ward. It's likely that few of the bands I wrote about in 1978 would have called themselves power pop, even the ones now definitively certified as such. Without knowing where any of this was headed, I clapped on a filter of my own devising and simply declared who had managed to get through it. I called Billy Squire's Piper the stink bombs of power pop. Cheap Trick was exactly how a pop rock band should sound. Eric Carmen's second solo album was full of mush and marks the end of Eric the pop singer. The Clash, while hardly a pop rock band, had strong pop sensibilities. The Dictators were a pop band with big amplifiers. Boston took the two components of power pop and greased them up to make a slick product with more hit potential than Muhammad Ali's fist. Sparks was an irrefutable force of Twinkie pop and rampaging electric guitar chords. Blondie were proof that New York punks could be a latent pop team. The Vibrators were thought of as a British Ramones. Hey, I was younger then. But there's an intriguing notion buried in this hindsight. Countering the usual route of a musical movement becoming diluted and dispersed over time, power pop's early days, in which a small handful of artists attempted to simultaneously mine a beloved legacy and pull away from simple tribute to it, were ill-defined and only came into focus with an explosion of bands who followed them. Within a few years there had been dedicated power pop sections in Sam Goody and Tower stores. They would have been bursting with tremendous albums by Marshall Crenshaw, Smithereens, Elvis Brothers, Buzzcocks, Let's Active, Plimsolls, Pez Band, Paul Collins's Beat, The Chords, Bram Tchaikovsky, Records, 2020, Real Kids, Romantics, DBs, REM, Undertones, Great Buildings, Hoodoo Gurus, Tommy Keene, and so many others. And they ushered in a glorious indie flood with entire bedroom labels devoted to the sound. Velvet Crush, Adam Schmidt, The 3 O'Clock, The Sneetches, The Sponge Tones, The Windbreakers. Is there a lesson to be learned from this? Snapshots can capture a moment in time, but they can mislead as much as inform. While retaining its essence, power pop has traveled a great way since those naive appraisals of 1978. I certainly could not have guessed how durable and diverse power pop would become, yielding everything from strict Beatles descendants to roaring shoegazers to twee minimalists, all finding ways to tweak the formula and still set those same old synapses snapping. The sound of innocence, at least in this corner of the musical universe, is eternal. Ira Robbins co-founded Trouser Press magazine in 1974 and was the pop music editor of Newsday in the 90s. In addition to 5 decades of music journalism, he is the author of 2 novels, Kick It Till It Breaks, 2009, and Mark Bolan Killed in Crash, 2020. He currently edits trouserpress.com and is preparing an anthology memoir.
The Cultivation of the Cult Pop Fan by Mary E. Donnelly. Bliss it was in that dawn to be alive, but to be young was very heaven. William Wordsworth, The Prelude. I was born to be a shoes fan. Right time, right place, right foundation. I grew up the younger sibling of 4 brothers and a sister. They were, almost to a person, music obsessives. One older brother was consumed by the Beatles. He made a tape of 15 seconds of every Beatles song then available in alphabetical order. He took me to Beatlemania for my 11th birthday. By the time I was 10, I knew every word to every song on their U.S. releases. My sister, with whom I shared a room, started every day with an album, usually the same album for months at a time. I clocked my life by her phases. Events were catalogued like a medieval archive. In the year of Bob Welch's French Kiss, the long winter of Steve Miller, the summer of Styx. Another brother dragged me along to the most terrifying used record store in the world. Under its low, dark ceilings and the eye of the chain-smoking owner who looked like he kept an axe under the counter, we scrounged through bins of absolute crap, looking for the one gem that would make it all worthwhile. He had, he says, a collection of about 5,000 singles at his peak, and we wallpapered the basement, where we younger siblings were allowed to go part feral, with full-page ads from Billboard and Rolling Stone and Crawdaddy standing in for real posters. I learned in junior high that if I scraped lunch trays in the cafeteria, I got a free lunch. My mom, rewarding my effort, continued to give me 40 cents a day. That was 2 singles a week, more than worth the social ostracism of that Darwinian system. And so it was that I was primed to be a music obsessive, raised with such behavior normalized and even encouraged. But I was also the first generation raised in the easily dismissed shadow of the baby boom. Whatever we did in the dark, tumultuous fallen days of the late 70s was never as good as, could never be as good as, the original British invasion and its various branches. And that pantheon was as fixed as any literary canon. The Beatles, the Stones, the Kinks, the Beach Boys and the Byrds representing proudly for the USA, but, also not quite the same. And so my music obsession tended to be with those older bands, especially those that had given up the ghost by the mid-70s, whose catalogs were conveniently complete. I liked new stuff, Elvis Costello, The Knack, The Undertones, but I knew mine was a fallen taste in a fallen world. I accepted this state of affairs as I accepted most things in my life, outwardly docile but with an underlying restlessness. My conversion can be traced to one night, which can be pinpointed to within a few-week window in the fall of 1979. Let's say the first or second Saturday of October. My eldest brother, Paul, the Beatle brother, had an apartment the next town over, and if we younger siblings were very, very good, he'd let one of us spend a night on his couch pretty regularly. The place was a dump, a 3rd-floor garret, ceilings not 7 feet high, roof pitching lower everywhere. But the invitation was a treat. Paul had cable TV and a great stereo and hundreds of record albums. We could stay up late to watch Saturday Night Live as long as we got up for church the next day. One day, shortly before my 13th birthday, Paul told me he wanted to play me something he thought I would like, so I sprawled on the sketchy carpet, ready to listen. First, he played me the Beatles' The Night Before, a song I knew well. Then he changed the...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?